Welcome back to the channel, guys. What you seen right there was me welding up the TMZ lower torque boxes. Now you can buy them in two different ways. You can get them welded up already, or for a couple $100 less you can weld them up yourself. I did choose the weld up because obviously that's what I do, and I saved a couple $100. I figured I'm welding the whole car together anyway, so why not, right? Making a lot of progress on the car lately, doing a lot of welding. Figured I'd stop and take a little video, fill you guys in on what's going on and what I'm doing and where I'm going with it. Starting to get a lot of feedback from the channel, some negative, some positive, lots of questions. I do realize I'm not in depth enough, fulfilling enough, telling where I'm getting the parts, why I'm putting the parts on the vehicle. So I'm going to try to get more in depth with that. So bear with me. This is my first time doing this. It'll get better, I promise. The first question was, why the torque boxes? Why do you got to do that? Why can't we just race the car without them? Why can't we just race the car with factory torque boxes? Some people do it. Some people strengthen them up. Some people weld them up. Guys are getting away with that. I only want to do this once. I want to be hard on this car and not have to worry about it breaking. So let's go into the TMZ torque box. I have them both welded completely in. So let's check it out, see how it goes in. On the last video, I showed you guys kind of how I was cutting it out. I had part of one side cutting it out. It is a nightmare. Let's turn this camera around and try to get the light and show you what's going on. So basically it's cut out and welded in. This gives us adjustability for the control arm mounting location. So this gives us a lot of bar change options. And if you go inside the rail, there's a window with a plate welded in, so we can get the nut on there. Everything is level. Keeping everything level is important. The car's level on the rack. Same thing in the chassis bench. When you guys see it on there, it's also level. That way we could put all our parts on and make sure obviously all the parts are level, everything's square, and good to go. So you can see it's completely welded pretty much everywhere where I can get a weld. You want this part solid. I mean, this is where you're going to be pushing 1200 horsepower or whatever you're throwing at it. The rear end's pushing right here. You want this part strong. You want it solid. All right. Here's the upper torque box kit. I don't have this thing welded all the way up yet. It's pretty much just tacked in. Hopefully it's where it's going to go. A couple more measurements and stuff, and just to make sure, and I'll be fully welding this in. These are for the upper control arms, and you can see all the adjustability on them. So this is all gonna help change the instant center of the vehicle as it leaves the line, whether it wheelies or keeps the nose down. This is all gonna be determined by where we put those bar angles, and it's gonna be different on every vehicle depending on where the weights are at or stuff like that. No race car is the same. These aren't factory vehicles. The weights are all different. The power levels are different. So that's where we're at with that. The torque boxes are done. And then we went on to fit the mini tubs. They didn't fit as great as I wanted them to. They're designed for a Fox Body Mustang, and the Lincoln wheel tubs are actually just a little bit bigger in the back area because the wheel well kind of arches back more. It's not completely round. So if you could see, it wants to dive, and the Lincoln well wants to be on an angle, so fit them in there as best as possible. I pretty much left this flange and bent it over, and you could see I just have it tacked right to it. Not too bad. One thing I did miss was the frame notch. If you could see how the frame had to be notched right here to fit the tire and to fit the tub, and there was a plate put in there to strengthen it back up, and that's fully welded. You can see this side was done too. Now they don't fit perfectly, and I'm not going to fully weld this stuff up, but it's going to get like a body caulk seam sealer on all the joints so that it looks factory. Down here I'm just kind of plating in with patches because they don't fit the floor properly exactly right, and I still got some trimming to do up here, so it'll be a little nicer. You don't want to cut too much off. You'd rather cut just a little bit away and not enough, because you can't put back material. At least you can't do it the same way. So that's that. The next thing that's going to go on is, one thing you don't realize when you mini tub a car, you get rid of the shock mounting locations. So you got to come up with a new idea for shocks. You don't have the coil on the control arm anymore with the shock. You do a coil over kit. You can either make up one of these bars, or Team Z sells this one. It's just to mount 2 coil over shocks. It welds up into the frame like so, and that's to mount the shocks. So if we come back to the front, something I wasn't able to show you guys before, like I showed you, this has all been stitched. That means maybe an inch long tack weld in between every spot weld. They follow the frame rail all the way down. And the reason we do that is to tighten up the chassis, strengthen it. If you go on my rear frame rail, same thing. You'll see these tacks up here where this was put in. You'll see these tacks where the spare tire well was cut out. This holds these 2 layers together and helps box in this frame. So you want to do that. And I had one guy ask, why don't we weld it up solid? Well, we can, but the problem is when you're MIG welding or using any other kind of welding, when you weld it up solid, you're making a lot of heat. And when you make heat, you're making the metal brittle when it cools off, and it stays brittle. We don't want that. So we put a tack in between each part, and it seems to do fine. It takes the power, it's got some flex to it, but yet still stronger than it was. You'll see some Pro Mod chassis and stuff that they'll fight cracks in the chassis, they'll fight stuff like that. So they're hard to find. They could break and wear out parts, cause accidents. So we don't want to have any of those issues. All the seat brackets that I showed you guys from the last video have been removed. Little piddly pieces, you're talking ounces of weight, that it all adds up. You can see it all on the floor down there, everything but those rotors. But that's a big 10-pound thing of mess that we just got off the car. Okay, we are in the trunk of the car now, looking towards the front between the tubs. Just to show you guys how gutted it is. There were some brackets and bracing in here removed. The door bars, the whole center parts of the doors, you know, the windows, motors, all that stuff. The complete dashboard, all the sound deadener, the undercoat. We still got to come in and stitch up this piece. Okay, you'll see joints up here I want to stitch up. And anybody's welcome to comment on this if they feel like I could be doing something else. All this stuff's going to be stitched up. And the reason for it is first of all, when you have all this interior and plastic and trim, you do realize that all has to take the energy of this car when it comes off that trans brake. The power has to transfer through all of this stuff, all the stuff that was in here, and to get to the back tire, to plant the weight, to get the suspension to move, to get it to react. So when we tighten up all this stuff that follows, say the roll bars and stuff, I mean, you can come in here and just look. I mean, I'm moving that a lot, so there's just 2 tacks in there from the factory. So we got some welding to do in here yet. And then I will come in here with a 3-inch hole saw and just blast holes everywhere I can to get rid of even more weight after it's stitched up. Hey guys, inside the Lincoln Mark 7 right now. Here's where I've pretty much been camped out for a pretty big part of the day. I just want to stop and focus on another thing I want to touch base on, which is safety. Show you what I'm using and how to avoid injury. Me being a collision repair tech, I'm used to having to work with these sharp metals, with cutting and grinding and welding and creating a lot of sparks and shavings. Used to go into the emergency room probably once a year to get metal out of my eye. Basically, it feels like you got something in there and you can't get it out, you can't move it, it's still there the next day. It hurts your eyelid when you blink. We're talking tiny little metal flakes that will dig into your eyeball if you rub your eye or try to get it out. So we want to avoid that. I was just at the emergency room last week to get a piece out of my eye, which is very likely to happen when you're working under a car on the lift over your head doing welding and grinding. You can't be safe enough. So at a minimum, I always wear glasses. You want them tightly fit to your head. Metal shavings will fall into your hair, so you want to keep your hair clean. Don't let it fall into your eyes. If you got eyebrows like me, they collect in your eyebrows. Even at night, they could still fall out into your eye, so you can't be careful enough. These things are little razor blades. I always wear these thick leather gloves. They're very thick. These ones have held up for a lot of years. When I'm dealing with any sharp metal, cutting, grinding, anything that's hot, I MIG weld with these gloves. Grinding, buy high quality abrasives and cutting wheels and stuff that lasts. You're gonna have better luck. You're gonna create less sparks, stuff like that. Just less of a chance of metal getting into your eye if you don't have to do as much work to get done what you gotta get done. When I'm cutting and grinding, I also have my good welding helmet, which also doubles as a face shield because it auto tints. So I mean, I'm still getting metal in my eye with those 2 things. So you know, you can't be safe enough. I'm just in here with my tin snips and some scrap that was cut off from the mini tubs, and I'm just patching in here. Nothing fancy. Like I said, all this is gonna get seam sealed in like factory. You won't see it, and then it's gonna get all black primer, everything under the car. Any of the fresh fabrication inside the car will get epoxy primer, and that's going to be black epoxy primer. It's going to double as a corrosion protection, plus it can be ground and still, you know, you can weld stuff to it. So we'll be putting the cage in after that's done, so stay tuned. I'm going to get back to getting these tacked in and finish editing this video tonight. and you don't want to have it. Basically what happens is you drive there, they put your head into this kind of like a bracket with pads on it so it can't move, and they put some eye drops into your eye to numb it, and then they put a clamp on your eye to keep your eye open, and there's a microscope that zooms in. The doctor's there with a little needle. Honestly, it's a little sharp piece of metal. It's thinner than a needle, and he goes in there and he just picks it out till it falls out, and they can get it out of your eye. But you want to avoid it at all costs. It is not fun, and if you're like me, small business owner, you don't have insurance, so it costs about $1,500. So it's definitely worth having some protection, at least as much you can get. And like I said, keep the stuff out of your hair and eyebrows, and mostly pieces from like the cutoff wheel will throw sparks, tiny fragments everywhere, and the this little saw here creates tiny little pieces of dust. If you could see it on the ground there, if you look at that dust under a microscope, it is tiny little shards of steel, somewhat like this, just microscopic, and got tons of sharp edges to it. So careful with that stuff. Another thing that's important is a mask, at least a dust particle mask like this. It's a respirator. We're creating a lot of dust when we're sanding on these old cars. We don't know if there's asbestos and seam sealers and caulks and primers. We don't want to be inhaling that stuff. Another thing is when we're grinding, especially with the belt sander, grinding through spot welds, we're creating a lot of fine, light dust that stays in the air for a long time. And you will inhale all those tiny little medical fragments. And guess what? When they hit your sinuses or your lungs or wherever they go, they create rust. They rust. So we want to filter that stuff out. Mask is important. Most of the time you think you're fine. It's when you get home, when you're coughing up the black phlegm and shitty boogers. We don't want that, so important. And I got my thick Carhartt hoodie on, even though it's about 75 degrees in the shop. Kind of warm, but I'm tired of getting burn holes in all my nice t-shirts and tiny little burns on my arms from cutting and welding sparks. So definitely a must. It's saved a lot of my arms and a lot of even your work shirts. They'll start ripping to shreds. If you got a nice t-shirt and you want to save it, get yourself something to fucking weld and fabricate in like this. Hey guys, another quick break here. My welder ran out of Mig wire and I have to put a new spool in, so it's a good time to show you guys what I'm using for a welder and how I got it set up and what I'm doing. So basically, if you've never welded before, I was 25 years old. I basically went out and got myself a welder, and YouTube isn't what it is now. There's not many videos or anything, so I kind of learned everything the hard way there too. But I'll show you what I'm working with, which is what I would consider the bare minimum of what you would want. So my first welder was a Clark. It looks identical to this, but I could tell you what, from welding with that for 15 years and welding with a Miller for maybe 2 years, boy does it make you a hero. If you just start with this to begin with, even if you're teaching yourself like I did, just do it. I'm telling you right now, it's worth every penny. This is a Millimatic 215, which means it pretty much runs on 210, 220, or 110 regular outlet, which is all I've ever used it on. Basically, you put in the metal thickness and the rod or the you're using, which is this wire for this chassis building. I'm using 030 over here. It's ER70S6, and basically it's for steel, mild steel, up and down from there. I use a 10-pound spool. There's smaller spools if you're doing smaller jobs. When I was doing collision work, I would use a finer wire, which is like 030 or 025, I mean, which is what you'd want for the newer style bodies, because they're thinner steel, high strength steel, so you don't want to be, you'll just burn it away trying to use this stuff. But this car is 80s, so mild steel it is. I'm putting in this is a cheaper roll from Harbor Freight, but it's gonna work just fine. It's the same stuff. Wouldn't doubt if it came from the same Chinese place. So basically this is the Miller-Matic 215, and it will MIG weld, okay, which is what we're doing with this car. It will TIG weld, and it will weld aluminum as well. Around. You need a shielding gas when you're trying to do nice work on vehicles, so I got the big boy bottle. It's 75% argon, 25% carbon dioxide, which is a cheaper alternative to what do you call it? Just straight argon. I do have an extension cord, which is a heavy duty outdoor extension cord, wrapped onto this machine. That cord is dedicated to the machine. So some other things I have that are a must is they make other brands of self-tinning welding helmets. It fits your head. You don't have to flip it down every time you weld. You could see what you're welding, which is another important thing I will get at. I carry these snap-on flashlights everywhere. Anything that I work on, whether it's changing oil to doing some bearings on a car. I mean, this thing's magnetic and it just spotlights wherever you're working. I mean, I can't work without it. I can't grind without it. You see so much better. If you could do a good job with that light on, it will look amazing with it off. It will help with your welding. You could see every bead. I got another one on the toolbox. That one charges, well, this one's in use, so I'm never without it. I can keep working with the light. Lighting is very important. You want a well-lit shop. You could see all the lights in here. You can never have enough lights. So on this cart, I keep some self-tapping screws on top, different sizes. You're going to need that to temporarily hold panels in place. They be removed, or if you just plan on using them. Got some tabs back there, all my welding tips, clamps, markers, Sharpies, stuff like that. This drawer, I keep all my vice grips. Another thing you're going to have pretty good assortment of vice grips to hold stuff in place while it's tacked in, or just for mock-up purposes. I keep my gloves, which we talked about earlier, and a wire brush. This is what you're going to use to knock the slag and shit off your welds after you're done with them. Now, typically, what would come with your welder, which you get at the store, would be a steel brush, which you'd use on your grill. Now what happens with those when they sit? They get rusty. I don't give a fuck how good you keep it. It's gonna get rusty. This house, stainless steel bristles. Kind of hard to find some. I think this is from the hardware store though, but the bristles will not rust. You don't want to be putting rust dust into your brand new welds. That's the last thing you want into your freshly welded, nice looking bead, is to brush it off with a rusty brush and have it rusty. So this is one way to keep your stuff clean. This is probably a year old. The brush is beat, as you can see, but look at how shiny the bristles are. Stainless steel. And I got the TIG welding stuff down here, which we'll have to get into on another video as well. Other thing is a metal thickness gauge, so you know what thickness of metal you're working with when you put the setting into the welder. So that's basic setup and what you need. If there's anything, I guess put it in the comments and I'll cover it on another video. One very important tool that I forgot to mention is a good set of Mig Pliers. What are Mig Pliers? They're specifically for MIG welding. It's all you need. You need it right by you when you're welding. These pliers are typically sold anywhere where welding supplies are, whether it's Harbor Freight or Menards. I think these ones were for Menards, and I've had them for a long time. They're very good. They're made of a non-ferrous metal, which means you can't weld to it. The welding will not stick to it. Let's start at the tip. The tip's going to be shaped like that, basically for cleaning all the slag and stuff out of this tip. You want to keep this tip clear at all times. You can see how filthy it is in there, and I got to get after it with these pliers. So that needs to be cleaned with that tip. Next on it is going to be the tip. If you can see the tip, it's shaped to unscrew the tip on the MIG welder when you have to change the tip. The next thing on here is these, which you will use to screw this on. I just hand tighten it with this particular welder because that's all it calls for, but some welders you have to tighten this on. Another thing, obviously, it's a cutter to cut the wire. You will be trimming the wire to obviously keep it close to the work as possible when you're using it. So definitely a handy tool. If you're not using one, get one.